Now.
Okay, well, welcome everybody to our next series of CE classes. Today we're talking about the importance of earnest money and the REPC, and we're introducing a brand new addendum that was born just this month. So it's just a little baby infant, and it's so cute, and everybody just loves this new form. So welcome everybody to our discussion today. Of course, this is a CE class, so Angie is taking a screenshot of all of you. If you are not on video, please make sure that you're answering the questions along the way. Otherwise, we'll not be able to give you credit for this 1 hour CE class today. We'll end on pretty close on time. Guys, we'll end at about 11:30. So I have a special guest to announce today. So let me introduce you guys to Marc O'Brien. Marc, wave your hand there. This is Marc, and Marc, you're broadcasting from, are you up in Park City?
I'm in Park City, yes.
You're in Park City. Marc, everybody, is our corporate attorney. Maybe, Marc, you could tell everybody a little bit about just your background and the role you play for the company.
Sure. My name is Marc O'Brien again. I'm counsel at Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, Utah Properties. Very happily, by the way. And I've been in Park City for about 14, 15 years now, and representing buyers and sellers and brokerages as well. But excited to be a part of this, and excited to be working with the company and all of you agents. If there's anything I can do to help on behalf of the brokerage, my door is always open, or my phone is always open. So,
you know, I can. Marc, we're all thrilled to have you. You're so needed in our firm, and not just an attorney, you guys, but somebody who has the background and the acumen to understand real estate and the UAR forms and the complexity of our transactions, residential, commercial. It's such a breath of fresh air to have Marc join our leadership team and be a part of who we are as a company. I would just remind everybody that Marc does represent Berkshire Hathaway, the brokerage, and we do not extend his services out to our clients, buyers and sellers, landlords, tenants, developers, builders, that sort of thing. In the sense that we can help the company, then those things sometimes overlap, but we'll be sensitive about that. But Marc, welcome, and thank you for all your work on what we've had to address today. So guys, let's go look, you've got the materials there in your email, right? Maybe quick raise a hand. Were you able to print them off so you can make notes? Okay, good, because we're gonna fly through a lot of this and make some notes today. The objectives in this class is to have a better understanding of the language that the REPC has and uses when it addresses earnest money, to have a better understanding of earnest money, the contrast between the title company addendum that is drafted by the UAR and the new language in which we needed, which is put together mostly with Marc's help. And we'll address that internal addendum that's unique to Berkshire Hathaway and how we solve this problem. First of all, let's talk about, Marc, we thought we'd tee this up with a reminder to everybody on what earnest money is. So perhaps I'll tee up the question and you feel free to weigh in on this. We thought we would remind everybody, what role does earnest money play in the real estate transaction? What perspective do buyers and sellers have on this? And how important is that in a real estate deal?
Well, from the buyer's perspective, it's kind of the initial salvo. It's part of the offer extended to the seller. It expresses interest for one, and it establishes a contractual basis to, for lack of a better term, kind of lock up the property so that the buyer has first dibs, barring any backup offers. It also establishes, from the seller's perspective, it establishes a potential amount of damages that the seller may become entitled to in the event of a breach or default of the contract by buyer. Interestingly, it also may establish the amount of damages that the seller is subject to paying in the event of a seller default. We I'm sure we'll get to it later, but if we consider section 16.2, seller default can require the seller to have to pay liquidated damages in the amount of the earnest money. So it's very important up front for both buyer and seller to consider the ramifications of earnest money. While it is an expression of interest and it hopefully will be simply credited at closing towards the purchase price, that often isn't the case, and it often becomes a subject of dispute.
So on that note, Mark, how often do we see disputes over earnest money? How often do we have earnest money sitting in account? Yeah, I mean, how do you have any idea on the frequency or ratio that we see people arguing over that amount?
I'm not sure the frequency that the brokerage sees it. I'm sure the agents see it quite a bit. When it becomes a dispute, I often see it. And, you know, it's often because that is the only money that is really available in the transaction, readily available in the transaction. It's the first thing that both buyers and sellers and brokerages and agents will see as a potential source for a remedy.
In a way, we're trying to avoid litigation through having the amount there set aside so it doesn't get costly. Obviously, I think a lot of us could look at earnest money from two different perspectives because that's the nature of our business. One day we're writing the offer for a buyer, and the other day we're looking at offers representing a seller client. Because of that, we ran into a problem. And let's talk about the role the broker plays in holding earnest money. So, guys, a lot of you, let me tee this up for Mark a little bit, but you may not understand this, but the state of Utah in the licensing rules does require an active real estate broker to have a trust account open. Now, they do not require that trust account to be used. And so some brokerages have chosen to, frankly, not participate in the cost to support, to balance, to maintain the software in which that you have to learn to manage it. The state of Utah mandates brokers reconcile their trust account every 30 days. If earnest monies that had become commissions have been left in that account too long, ultimately, over years, that would divert to the state even. Commingling, as you remember from pre-licensing school, we don't put commissions in trust accounts, and it's subject to more scrutiny, that it's a neutral place. Well, because of liabilities even, and we've kind of already hit on this, that agents, brokers kind of inherit the liability of a potential dispute over deposits in which they may have to mitigate and work out an arrangement between buyers and sellers as earnest money set in their accounts. So why am I bringing all this up? It's because some brokers just choose not to participate. All right, so they've just said, we're not going to handle earnest money. And I know that's not new news to anyone, but what's happened over time, and the reason we're here today, is not only to get a better understanding of what earnest money is in a deal, but to how to address the problem that can arise when they don't use their account. You're a listing agent, let's take that perspective, and we're left with a buyer's broker who does not want to use their trust account. And so you know what's coming, right? What's coming? Matter of fact, let's see how smart everybody is. What addendum are you likely to see? Type it in the chat, and we'll call this participation number 1 for CE credit. What are you likely to see show up in that offer that is going to come in dealing with earnest money when the buyer's broker does not use their trust account? So there's 79 of us right now, guys. Make sure you're all answering this so we can come back and look at the notes. Okay, yeah, you're all they've all got it, Mark. See how smart we are?
Seeing a lot of raised hands.
Yep. Yeah, they got it, and they're you can see on the chat, if you don't have that pulled up, they're answering by saying it's the title company UAR addendum. Okay, Mark, I'm following our outline here. Let's
Sure.
see. Now we're down to which sections. So let's pose this question. Matter of fact, before I show everyone my screen and give them the answer, hey guys, how many times do you think the REPC says that earnest money can be released without further written authorization? How many times does the REPC say that if a default or a deadline is missed, without further written authorization is required? How many times? Okay, there's your, see what everyone's doing is they're waiting for their friends to answer, and then they're just gonna throw out, well, who's smart in that list? This is an awful like phone a friend. All right, we're getting all over the board. 2, 3, 4. Well, let me show you guys the image here. REPC highlighted. There we go. Well, I'll just start you off at the front. Paragraph 1 doesn't say without further written authorization. As we scroll through, the first time we see it is in section 8. Under due diligence, the right to cancel. If the buyer cancels, see where it says without further written authorization. Here it is again in 8.2, without further written authorization from the seller. It's said a couple more times in our financing paragraph, twice there. And then again in the release to the seller, again without further written authorization. All right, so if any of you said 5, nice job. Courtney, let's give them those gold stars you hand out. Yeah? Okay. Mark, would you weigh in on this? Why do you think it is that the division put some, I guess, some description around the broker's role in releasing that money? Why do you think they said, let's let the broker, if it's simple to understand, why do you think that we've allowed brokers just to release that money without any further action?
Well, the REPC itself, in these sections that you pointed out, it is designed to express the will of the parties. The will of the buyer and seller. The parties have come together, expressed their will here, and said, these are conditions under which we're willing to go into the contract with an understanding that the earnest money will be released without any sort of judgment or other further authorization by anyone, whether it be the brokerage, either brokerage, a title company, which we're not involved with just yet, but any further authorization. This simply expresses the will of the parties, and that's appropriate. It kind of takes it out of the hands of the brokerage having to make a decision in terms of releasing the earnest money. And it's a good result. The parties go into this relationship with some certainty as to the disposition of the earnest money based on contingencies. So that's a good result.
How many, do you think we do a good job as agents describing that we've already agreed to this concept of if there's a problem, it's just going to be released? Do you think that we're doing a good job of explaining that?
I'd like to think so, and I think we can always do better. I mean, this is obviously a topic that is very important. That's why we're having this. Earnest money is a vital aspect of any real estate transaction, and it has a role throughout the transaction. As I said earlier, hopefully it's simply credited towards the purchase price at closing, but that often isn't the case. You know, I think it's good for the parties to have some certainty as to how it's disposed of.
Very good. I'm going to go back to the REPC, guys, and show you something that I think often comes up. And how many of you have been into some of my classes where I've said you should use the forms in your presentations? Do you remember these discussions? And we say, you know, that's a good question. I think we should look at the form that addresses that. don't forget, whether I'm buyer or seller, that I should be talking about Section 16 and what the expectation is, right? Thanks, Mark. Every meeting you're doing that. Nice job. So, when someone says, well, how does earnest money work? How do we know we have a deal? When can we pack up? How do I know that we've got a likelihood it'll close? And those are all great questions. And a great way to respond to that is acknowledge it, of course, and say, there's a part of our purchase contract, don't say REPSI, part of our purchase agreement or contract that addresses this issue. Perhaps we should look there. And when you look at Section 16 and get these two different perspectives, if buyer defaults, this is what happens. If seller defaults, and this is what happens, then you start to come back and look at these dates are very critical. And this concept of the earnest money is going to be passed along that is triggered by some of these events, then I think you've started to frame it right with buyers and sellers. It should be no surprise to them that this earnest money could be released to another party or refunded back to them under certain, things that happen in the transaction. Mark, any comments on that?
Yeah, I think, going back to your question, I think it's very important, and this provides an opportunity for agents to add value to the transaction. That's kind of what we're here for, is to add value to the transaction and really walk clients through how the earnest money, once it goes into a trust account held somewhere, which we'll get into, how it's to be allocated. And it really involves, like Will said, a walk through Section 8 and Section 16 and a little bit of Section 20, which deals with risk of loss to the property. They're all instances where the earnest money could be released to either buyer or seller, or in at least one instance to both parties, half to each party. So it's a great opportunity for agents to add value to the transaction by really explaining what earnest money means. So many times it's just, in my experience, it's kind of an afterthought. We'll put down $10,000 and not really have an understanding of what that means and how it could be returned or ultimately turned over to the seller.
Let's think about how we can answer this question. They ask us how much earnest money I should put down. What question should we ask them?
Should we ask a buyer?
Yeah, let Mark, before you answer, I know you know the answer. Let's see if the agents know this. Your buyer just asked you in filling out an agreement, you've come to the section where they said, how much earnest money do you think we should put down? What question should you ask the buyer? Instead of answering it for them, because we shouldn't be doing that, right? We shouldn't be saying, oh, I've got it all figured out. You should put down 10,000, 5,000, 100, 20,000, 500,000. Yesterday, we dealt with the transaction has $500,000 of earnest money. So why would we say you should do this? So what's the question we should ask? Let's see how we're weighing in on this. Hey, Joe, will you make sure you type in that so when we come back and look at these answers, I know what the question was?
Got your back. I interpreted how you and Mark both took 3 minutes to ask that question.
Okay. How much are you willing to risk losing? How much would you be willing to risk? Risk amount. How much would you be willing to lose if you defaulted? What questions should we ask? Okay. Thank you, Joe. What are capability down? Guys, let me give you what I think is a little better question. And I'm not going to be able to read all of these, but thank you for your feedback. How strongly, consider this. Mark and I were just talking about Section 16 and the role that earnest money plays in a transaction. Perhaps we should ask them, what would your damages be if the seller defaulted? Because now we're starting to frame it more of what earnest money's purpose is. It's set aside in case someone's harmed. So it's not just how serious you are. It's not just that. It's set aside for damages. So what would happen now? Every case is a little bit different. And look at the message the buyer sends to the seller when they say, I'm willing to put an amount forward that in case I damage you, here's the money that would make you whole. I think we're getting that. That's a little better. Look, none of this is always, this isn't always do this, because every case is a little bit different. But at the heart of the matter here, agents shouldn't be answering the question of how much to put earnest money down. Instead, we should be guiding them and leading them with questions so they can understand the role that earnest money plays. And now they can come to their own conclusions. You can walk them through that. Now, perhaps they'll say, I don't know what my damages would be. What do you mean? Well, let's think about what we're saying to the other side, and let's think about what our own damages would be. Remember, that seller's got to match that money. If that seller decides to default, they have to match that money. What we don't want to have happen is later on they say, if I would have known that, I would have put more down. Or if I would have known that, I'd have put less down. Right, guys? So that's a better way, I think, to initiate the discussion. And thank you for all of your comments. Mark, anything you want to add to that on what the agent might be able to do a little better as they're talking about that question?
Yes, I saw a lot of good answers, and they're all correct. But I think initially that question is an opportunity for you to walk the client through the contract and explain how earnest money operates in terms of the contract. And it also is the opportunity to explain, as Will said, kind of what it means to a seller. It is. I saw some responses that demonstrates how earnest you are, which is correct. But what it can mean to a seller in the event of your default, and what it can mean to you in the event the seller defaults. So it's very important to look at earnest money not only as a sort of a down payment or a credit towards the purchase price, but also as damages, potential damages from both sides.
Okay, well said, Mark. Let's move on now to the options we have when earnest money is brought up in an offer. Hold on just a sec, guys. Wrong image. Let's go here. Okay. So guys, there's only really 3 options that can happen when we have this over here represents an accepted offer. Everyone see this okay? So this represents the offer that has come in. Frame that a little bit better. Most often we're going to see the earnest money deposit in the buyer broker trust account. That's predominantly what happens when the other side is using the trust account. So, and this is what happens inside our own brokerage. We hold an enormous amount of earnest money at any given time. Matter of fact, it's a great indicator for us on what our pipeline looks like. So we monitor that closely. I mean, there's millions of dollars in our trust account at any given time. It could be held at a title company. And we've been floating around this concept that perhaps it could be held at seller's brokerage trust account when the other side is not willing to use their buyer broker trust account. Mark, did I miss anything on the reasons why brokerages choose not to use that account? Or do you want to maybe just reframe that if you can?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to really just the administrative hassle of having to deal with earnest money and the potential of having a dispute and the brokerage having to become involved, whether they're impleading the amount into court because of a buyer-seller dispute. It's just an added responsibility that some brokerages don't want to have, unfortunately. But it's also an opportunity, as we'll get into in a minute, for Berkshire Hathaway to step up and take that responsibility.
Yeah, so we have seen title companies step forward and say, well, if you'll send us your business, we'll handle the earnest money. And so along comes this language that looks like this, right? Okay, this is the UAR deposit of earnest money with title company, insurance company addendum. The UAR was prompted to draft this, guys, from the state of Utah. You can tell that it's a protection from the division and the language. So we'll go through that. If earnest money is to be held at a title company, buyer and seller are advised that the title insurance company may require, through separate written agreement, instructions that both buyer and seller mutually authorize the disbursement of earnest money deposit, even if the REPC states that no additional written authorization is required, which may result in additional delays, costs for either party to receive their earnest money deposits. Buyer and seller acknowledge that the Division of Real Estate has no authority over title companies, release, disbursement of earnest money deposits. And of course, everyone's going to sign that. And when they do, like any addendum, this then trumps and changes and modifies the pre-agreed to REPC, which we've already said has 5 different times where it says release without further written authorization. Okay, so Marc, could you speak about what kind of problems we see when earnest monies are at title companies and we're now required to get the other party's signature? What are you seeing on that front when we've got a problem there?
Sure. The biggest issue for me and for buyers and sellers is that we've usurped the will of the parties in the purchase contract, wherein we've already decided, we've agreed on how earnest money was to be held, released, distributed, allocated. This addendum takes that away from the parties and puts the control in the title company's hands of the earnest money. And it requires, as it says, oftentimes buyer and seller signature. Now, we've had deals where either the buyer or seller disappears and the earnest money sits in the title company's account. And it can sit there for a long time until it's ultimately dispersed to the state, which is obviously something neither party wants. It's not a result. It's not a good result. It's not a solution. And neither party intended for that to happen. So getting the title company involved, and again, it says it's under a different regulatory structure. Title companies are regulated by the Department of Insurance. And in fact, the addendum says that the Division of Real Estate will have no authority over the release of earnest money. It kind of is it's kind of a punt to the title company to deal with this. And it's not good for your clients to allow this to happen, in my view.
Will, we had a good question come in. Sorry, Will, we had a good question come in from Debbie Sexton.
Yeah.
She asked, have you ever had an instance where a seller reduced the amount of earnest money out of concern that it's too high and too much of a risk for them? Maybe they fear that they may default. Just, I think that's a pretty good discussion point here.
I mean, I haven't seen that. Marc, have you?
I've not seen that, no.
But I think Debbie's question is she's understanding and look at earnest money the right way. That we mutually agree to amounts that in case there's a default. And sellers should also be asked if that money is enough to cover their damages, right? So instead of just glossing over it and going right to purchase price. And look, quickly raise your hand if you felt like an offer was better because the earnest money was higher. You're on the listing side. Yes? You ever have a red flag on a deal because the earnest money was low? Raise your hand. Yeah, okay. I wanted to highlight something else here, Marc. I think it's important that we frame this right because I am kind of afraid that we'll get too excited about a new addendum and too excited about the problems that happen with title companies' earnest monies. Let's put this in proper context. We have thousands of deals that close with no problems that go to title companies, right? Yeah, and there's many times where it doesn't become a problem, but it becomes no problem when the other party signs off again, right? That they'll release it. Okay, so that means that the evidence or the issue was, resounding and, not in their favor, and it was clear. And at the end of the day, look, you're not going to win an argument over the earnest money, so you might as well let it go and you're signing it again. aren't we kind of, Mark, aren't we kind of managing some numbers here? Like we've been debating on a leadership level liability. We've been debating how many times title company closings go with no hitches, and we're certainly weighing all of this. Why do you think we landed on this? We needed to give another, tool in the toolbox. Was there a tipping point for you? I certainly had one myself, but I'll let you weigh on that. Was there a tipping point where, we could have let it go? We could have said, it is what it is, and we're aware of it, and we just marched forward. And there certainly were voices about that, on leadership team that said, hey, should we just leave it alone and not inherit the liability? Where was a tipping point for you on this?
Well, for me, it wasn't necessarily a particular transaction. It's more an opportunity to provide a service to clients. To say, we're not going to send this put this responsibility on a title company where we've already agreed in the purchase contract how we're going to deal with earnest money. We've provided that, the Division of Real Estate has provided that framework for you, and Berkshire Hathaway has made the decision that we're going to support that and step in and hold earnest money under the appropriate circumstances, so that we don't get involved with situations where a buyer or seller, depending on who we represent, their money is tied up at title and we didn't come up with a better solution. I think that's really the crux of it for me, is the brokerage needs to come up with a better solution in the event we end up in a circumstance where earnest money is at issue or disputed, and we can't have the parties agree to a release of it.
Very well said. Today, guys, this is a big moment, because this is a gem if you're not picking this up. But I'll just get another running start at this. Are we the best place for a seller to list their property? Aren't we born to net the seller the best bottom line? Isn't that why we exist? Isn't that why we have a marketing department? Are we also charged with lowering the amount of legal risk in the process? Yes. Is that why we have the leadership team? And frankly, isn't this why we have crazy form geeks on leadership? And is this why we have Marc as part of a resource? So the answer is yes, yes, yes. But this is a moment where we stood up and said, our brokerage, Berkshire Hathaway, we can provide a higher level of service to our seller clients on just that front. And we're not going to just allow the laziness and frankly, a lower commitment to the business from our discount brokers to trump all the language in the REPC that they would otherwise have agreed to if it wasn't for this. I don't want liability. I don't want the responsibility. And therefore buyers and sellers and clients have to just play along with me. I didn't like that. And so Marc, I think we're in lockstep on this. We are a full service brokerage. We're proud of that. We're not just traditional. We're trendsetters in the sense that the best thing for our seller clients we're passionate about. And we'll even put our money where our mouth is. We'll inherit the liability. And we had to debate this, guys. It's not a simple thing. So we here, welcome to the debates we had on leadership, and right? And we said, well, what about the liability? Well, how can we put? So guess what was born out of all of this? So we said, well, we can do this, but we're going to need to protect there's a couple things that we have to address. So, wow, talk about a lead into a form. This should have fireworks. Look, where's the drum roll? Hey, Joe, one of these days I'm going to have to learn the sound effects features on Zoom.
Dude, the funny thing is I have them, but you can't, in order to share them on the audio, you have to both be hosted at the same time, and you can't share my screen /sounds with your screens. But yes, I have a great soundboard. I just can't use it.
All right. So here we go. All right. Welcome to, and you guys have probably already printed this off. So Marc will now jump into that form, which you so greatly authored. Okay, we'll share, and we'll go to our new, whoops, not that one. Hold please, be right with you. Your call is very important to us. We appreciate your business. There it is. Okay. This is the form. Courtney, does this already reside at dot loop? Okay, she's saying yes, thumbs up. It's already there. I'll show you in a second where that's found. Courtney, you could help me in case I've got a Wasatch back dot loop account, but you could show me where that is. So guys, it's already there. You're authorized to use it. Frankly, we did use this in a couple of transactions last week, Mark. I think I told you about that.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So, Mark, take everybody through why. Let's talk about paragraph 1. Do you want to read that and then comment about why we felt like we needed to get a running start at this form with that language?
Sure. Paragraph 1 is largely a representation by the buyer of the circumstances that are leading to the use of this addendum. Either the buyer is representing that they're unrepresented by a real estate brokerage, or that they are represented by a real estate brokerage. But in either event, they've elected, the buyer and buyer's brokerage have elected not to hold the earnest money in the buyer's brokerage real estate trust account. So that kind of just sets the stage of why are we doing this? Why are we using this addendum? And then we get into section 2, which further tells the story of where the earnest money will be held and how it will be held, released, and distributed.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. The 3 things that are listed there are very different. So, guys, I want you to highlight this. Mark, why don't I do the simplistic example, and then let's go back in and weigh in on it.
Sure.
The first one, the buyer has got to give us their authority, their authorization, and agree to have this deposit in the seller's trust account. So you highlight that. That's their permission. Then we have to warn our seller clients of something. And this is very important. We've got to set the stage for our seller that they agree that the earnest money is going to be held here. However, we are going to be governed by the real estate purchase contract. See, we're going to hold it, release it, distribute it as the terms state in the REPC. So highlight that last sentence, very important. The final one is that we're restating what the REPC says, that this authorization doesn't require additional signatures by either party. So we're doubling down, we're emphasizing, we're restating what they already agreed to in the main body of the REPC. So I would highlight that. So that's the 3 things that we felt like we needed to address in this form. In other words, guys, we couldn't just grab a blank addendum and say, buyer agrees to deposit earnest money deposit in the seller's trust account. Okay, we couldn't just do that. We had to protect ourselves, because remember, Berkshire Hathaway is now taking on an additional liability with this action of using our trust account on a client we do not represent. Mark, anything else that we need to kind of say in these 3 sections?
I don't think there's anything else we need to include in the verbiage of the sections, but I do think it's important to understand that all we're doing here in these 3, 1 little I through 3 little I, is restating what exists in the REPC. We're not creating any new standards for the brokerage or for anyone in terms of holding and release of earnest money. We're simply simply putting the holding of earnest money back in the terms of the REPC. There's nothing new or novel here. We're just making it very, very clear, and this is important, to make it very clear to both buyer and seller that yes, Berkshire Hathaway is going to hold this earnest money, but it's going to be strictly in accordance with the REPC, the purchase contract.
I think that's well said. Kevin Larson, I think your comment there, guys, the UAR addendum warns buyers and sellers that earnest money could be trapped. And I think that's a good way to say it, Kev. And then when it's trapped there, the reason it's trapped is because of that additional, signature that's required. And to Mark's point, all we're doing is going back to really what the REPC already said, that we're going to release this money without further written authorization. So, Kev, thanks for weighing in on that. Okay, so questions, you guys. This is let's turn some time over to you. You could raise your hand in the chat. I'll unshare. Let's give you guys a chance to weigh in some questions. You can ask anything around this earnest money issue you would like. Joe, did we address all the questions that came up, or?
There's a couple. I think the most recent one is from Ron Eichers. He's saying, so if we're using this new addendum, does that mean there's no further signatures required from the previous addendum?
You mean as it relates to the release, Mark or Ron? As it relates to the release, no. Yeah, okay, yeah. If it relates to the release of earnest money, no, there are no further signatures required to release it. Hey, Mark,
Yes.
maybe this is a little, I don't know if delicate's the right word, but could there be cases where the brokerage is sitting on a large amount of earnest money and we may prefer to have the other party affirm that we're releasing it if a transaction's a little unclear? Could we maybe, yeah, I know that's, it's not the simple stuff, guys. Real estate is not simple, okay? It just isn't. So there are times where we may require, do you want to talk about that, another signature, even though it doesn't necessarily require it?
Sure. Part of the liability that Will was referring to that the brokerage is arguably taking on is really arises under Section 16. And when it's not necessarily clear whether or not there's been a default, it somewhat puts the brokerage in the position of having to determine default, which we don't necessarily want to do. But there are clear-cut instances when both buyer and seller are still around and buyer simply fails to close on the closing date and presents no excuse, no sort of argument as to why. Then clearly buyer's in default and it's pretty easy to release that earnest money to seller. Well, what if the buyer, to make an example, what if the buyer was in a car accident and failed to make closing? The money goes to seller and then you have an upset buyer because they can't, because that money was released arguably without their authorization. You can make an argument the other way, of course, but it gets a little hairy when the buyer has an excuse and the money is released to seller, under my example. The short of it is no deal and no set of facts and circumstances are clear cut in most instances. So the brokerage will be in a position from time to time to have to determine whether or not it's appropriate to release earnest money. And in those instances, it may be necessary to get both signatures in order to protect the brokerage from any exposure to either buyer or seller.
I think that dovetails really well, Will, with three of the questions that just showed up. Donna's asking, I've had buyer's agents say, why would I allow my buyers to put their money in your trust account? Which is, I would imagine, a decent objection.
Well, it is. Let's assume we're on the listing side, and the reason you would is not because of anything, guys, that it's not the agent, it's not the brokerage. We are not parties to this. Okay, so we've got to remember the principals in the transaction are the ones who are hanging their hat on the importance of the language of without further written authorization. It's not Will, the listing agent. It's not Michael, the listing agent. It's not that. Okay, so when you say my trust account, it has nothing to do with that. Trust account is neutral. It's just as governed at Berkshire Hathaway as it is at any other company. And perhaps, Donna, what we would do there, if your seller it has determined that language is material enough, that's when we would inject our addendum into this. And by the way, I do have another image, Mark, on this. Remember your timeline?
Yes.
I think it's important. Let's look at that really quick. Let's see. I've got to find it, guys. Hang on just a second. I've got to pull that up. Well, Mark, why don't you talk about the timing of how we address that, and I'll find the image while you're talking.
Sure. The timeline for presenting this addendum, typically the buyer will submit a offer via a purchase contract. And the purchase contract will either be silent on where the earnest money is to be held, or it'll specify that the earnest money is to be held with the title company. In that instance, the seller's agent might choose to contact the buyer's agent and get clarification as to either where the earnest money is to be held or why they're electing not to hold the earnest money in the buyer's brokerage account, or why they're proposing a title company. And through that conversation, under the scenario I've laid out, it would be an opportunity for the seller's agent to present this addendum as an alternative to the title company holding the earnest money for the reasons we've discussed, the alternative being bring it back into the under the governance of the purchase contract and back into kind of what we intended originally through the Division of Real Estate's regulatory authority.
So guys, here's the timeline of that. Submission of offer, it's either silent or it's going to another account. We've got to fix it. Either way, we either not going to go to title company or it doesn't address it and we've got a problem to solve. There's the conversation that Mark and I are talking about. We contact the buyer's agent, answer the question that Donna proposed. Why would I allow my buyers? Good question. Let me show you some language. This is why my seller finds that the earnest money amount is material and these deadlines are important to them. And frankly, you do not want to dispute. So we do want to hang our hat on the Rep C language. Therefore, we confirm that it's going to be held there. And then Mark, do you want to kind of talk? I mean, I guess we've kind of mentioned all of this already. I don't want to be too repetitive, but I suppose we just end up with the addendum being presented. Is there anything else we need to tell a buyer's agent? Perhaps we should remind them of Section 2 of our addendum, that, even though we do not represent the buyer client, that we do, we only will hold or release the funds as per the Rep C.
Right. And I think it's an opportunity to say that earnest money is important to the seller for obvious reasons. And we would like for it to be held consistent with the terms of the purchase contract. And we think for a variety of reasons that we've kind of covered, the seller's brokerage account provides better coverage for better protection for both the buyer and the seller. And there's nothing novel about the holding of the earnest money. We're not trying to do anything different. We're simply providing that the earnest money is going to be held and released in accordance with the Rep C, in accordance with what the parties want.
Right. Our last comment by Michael, excuse me, was if we question why we should allow buyer's earnest money to go to seller's broker's trust account, wouldn't the same reverse argument be true why a seller would allow the buyer's earnest money to be held at the buyer's title company? So I guess we're going to have to get real about how important this language is to our clients, this without further written authorization. Is it important to you? If it is, then we need the addendum. If it is not, then it's going to go to a title company. We'll cross our fingers that everything goes okay. Many times it does. Sometimes it doesn't. We're very aware of that. The expectation is a lot of the problem here. We have to manage that right. So don't skip over it and make sure that we're the ones leading the discussion on this. And they ultimately have made the decision. If remember, we talked about it. You decided the title company was okay. Here we are with a dispute. Don't be surprised when the other party refuses to sign the release, right? So that's kind of what, that's their call, not ours.
That was Michael Krause's comment, Will. He said, why would the seller be comfortable with it going to the buyer's title company, right? So exactly to your point, the conversation needs to be to the seller of understanding what the impact of that earnest money is. And it really is the seller's decision on where they would like to place it, as long as the seller is clear on what the value and what the risks are of having that go on. Right below that, Ramon has asked a great question as well, is that if one party does not sign, does that mean it automatically goes to the title company?
Automatically, no. We got to have some kind of instruction. Even a title company can't just deposit money without some instructions. And you see Mark nodding. Yeah. I mean, they're like us. If someone just wired us money, we don't know what to do with it, right, Court? Yep. And it happens. We don't just deposit it, you know? So we've got to have instructions on what to do with that. But that's a good question. Yeah, it doesn't automatically happen. Any other questions, you guys? We've got a few more minutes. I do want to show dot loop on where this is. But hey, before we do, you know what I'm going to find great joy in today? Just do you know how awesome it is to hear Joe Lowry speak in like real estate legal terms? I mean, it's awesome.
That's right. Will's rubbing off in all the right ways.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! So I'm just going through some of the other questions. I think we covered most of them. So Jonathan Sexton was asking, how often do we see buyers and sellers sue for damages? And Kevin Larson chimed in and saying, buyers suing the seller for damage is more common than the opposite. And then Mo asks, does the buyer still have the option to do the title company? That's, of course, what we just covered. Pam Olson says, if you represent the seller and the buyer's agency has no trust account, can you insist that the earnest money be deposited into the BHHS rather than the buyer's title company?
I suppose you can insist it like any other term. You know, I insist on a sales price. I insist on a closing date. I insist on what's excluded. I insist on due diligence deadlines. I mean, yes, you know, but again, they all have to agree to it. And in the end, we've got an agreement on all the terms of the Rep C, not just where it's held. But very, very, very good question.
And then Jackie, to kind of pile onto that, Jackie Bass says, doesn't the buyer's agent have to state in the addendum that the money will be held at the title company?
Yes. Yeah. Don't get confused on what we were saying. If they're silent, if we're unclear in another contract where it doesn't say where it's going, doesn't the Rep C already says in the first paragraph it's going to go where?
Well, it only says to a brokerage account. It doesn't say which brokerage account.
Yeah, Mark, very good. Let's show everybody that. I wonder if everyone misses that.
Yes.
Let's show that. Again, I'm going to go back to that Rep C highlighted. Let's go all the way back to the top. And what does that say? Earnest money by brokerage. So let's see. Deposit in the amount of and receipt of earnest money by what? The brokerage. So it doesn't say buyer's broker's trust account. You veterans out there, it used to, right? And Mark shaking his head. It used to say that. It doesn't say that. It just says brokerage account. Ah, look, we're so smart now. That was a good catch, by the way, Mark.
And then Michael Krause has got, you know, another fly in the ointment here by saying, what happens if the earnest money check bounces?
Okay.
By the way, he's giggling because he knows the answer. He just wants you to cover it.
He just wants me to go. I know the answer, but Mark, do you want to take that if the earnest money check bounces?
Well, I guess it doesn't matter which account it's in.
Yeah.
Whether it's buyers, sellers, or title. I guess the discussion or the argument there would come down to whether or not there was consideration, which is an entirely different CE.
Yeah. We treat that as a default. You know, you'd still go through the process of canceling, I think, officially, guys. I think that's what our agents often say. You know, do I have to cancel it if the earnest money bounce? And say, well, it's best if you do that. You know, because the earnest money is a term of it, and then we don't get left with, was it a default, a breach? Did it automatically cancel based on a default or a breach? We still just cancel the deal. Everyone, you know, confirms that it was canceled because of a default. Guys, go ahead, Mark. We're almost out of time, so I wanted to wrap it up soon.
Yeah, I was just going to say cancellation is certainly the best practice, and it calls to mind the importance of earnest money.
Yeah.
If you don't have earnest money, then it's best just to cancel and start over.
Right. Okay, let's get in the chat here. This will be for CE credits. Everyone grab your keyboard and answer this question for me. Does the REPC ever say that earnest money would become, does it ever say the word non-refundable? Let's just do a yes or no. And Joe, you type that in.
Type it now.
Okay, non-refundable. What section of the REPC says that earnest money is credited at closing? Give me a section. This is for CE. What section of the REPC says that earnest money ultimately will be credited?
Well, you're testing my typing skills. These guys are way faster.
For all of you who said section 8, you need to be better than that. So no, anyone have it? It is in section 8, but it's section 8 point what? Rena's looking at her, everyone's, this is what I see on the screen. Come on, Brandy, don't you know?
I'm seeing a lot of wrong answers.
Mike, nice one. 8.99999. All right. Well, it is section 8.4. Rachel's got it.
Bam.
There it is. Okay, there was a few more. Kent Root got it too. Paige, you got it. Jason, Brandy. Kent. Okay, good. Good job. Yeah, go ahead and weigh that in, guys, so we can see that you're participating. Frankly, I would like to share this particular CE recording with the division. I think this is a good sample of what a good CE class can be inside of a brokerage as we talk about our own form and also about the concept of earnest money. Was this beneficial for you all? Was this well worth your hour? Yes, this was beneficial. Thanks for the thumbs up. Okay, good. Well, there'll be more to come. Mark, thank you so much for your preparation on this. Guys, we're really lucky to have a superstar like Mark. It's been a joy, I can tell you personally, to work with him. He gets our business, and I'm very grateful for the ownership and leadership group of our company that allow us to continue to raise our level of professionalism and make the commitment, frankly, to continue to be better. So yeah, plenty of gratitude around. It's a great medicine for life. Let's not forget all the things that are going well, because many things are. And I sure appreciate and love all of you. Keep it up. Keep sharpening the saw and keep showing your value to your client. And I wish you well. You can always call any of the leadership team anytime. And please call anytime it's after 9 p.m. Please call Kevin Larson. Okay. Love you all. We'll see you next time. We'll call that one done. And we'll see you again sometime. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.